My name is Eleanor Wade, and I turned 74 on the day my own daughter tried to kill me. I remember the river air carrying the sharp scent of pine and diesel from the boat's engine, the kind of smell that usually filled me with comfort because I had spent most of my life guiding rafts through these waters. That evening, it was supposed to be a small celebration, just the three of us, my daughter Melissa, her husband Gregory, and me. There were paper plates, a cheap bottle of wine, and the awkward smiles we had been wearing like masks for months. When Melissa leaned close to refill my glass, her hand trembled ever so slightly. I thought it was the breeze, or maybe guilt, but the look in her eyes stopped me cold. Before I could ask, before I could even breathe, there was a shove at my back. The world tilted, the sky spun, and the Redstone River swallowed me whole. I kicked against the current, coughing, tasting gasoline and bitterness. Above the roar of the water, I caught the hum of the boat pulling away. My birthday cake was probably still sitting on the little table, its candles guttering in the night wind, while I was left to drown like a discarded memory. In that freezing darkness, a single thought anchored me. If I survived, I would never let them claim the legacy I had built with my own hands. The shock of the cold stole my breath before fear had the chance to do it. The Redstone River was a living thing that night, pulling me under with greedy hands, tossing me against its shoulders of current and foam. My chest clenched, and for a moment, I thought it would be easier to let go, to sink and let the water finish what my daughter had started. But instinct, that old companion from years guiding rafts and teaching novices how to respect the river, shoved its way to the surface. My body remembered what my mind was too stunned to process: roll onto my back, float, breathe in short bursts, conserve heat. I let the current carry me, blinking against the spray, searching for any point of light. I thought I saw the glint of the boat's lantern in the distance, growing smaller until it was gone. That was the first cut, the kind that burns hotter than ice. Not only had Melissa pushed me, she had turned her back while Gregory steered us apart forever. The night dragged on, every second sharp with cold and loneliness. My legs cramped, my arms burned, and memories rose like ghosts. My father teaching me to read the eddies, my late husband laughing as we built the cabin by the river, Melissa as a little girl splashing at the shore, begging me to let her paddle. All of that history felt like it was collapsing in the water with me, like it might sink into the silt and be forgotten. I whispered to myself, not caring if the river swallowed my words. Not tonight. Not like this. I fixed on the distant shoreline, a scatter of lights that must have been houses, and forced my aching limbs to keep rhythm with the current. Hours blurred. My teeth rattled like dice in a cup. My fingers curled into claws. I lost track of time, caught between numbness and panic. But then, a darker shadow against the darker night, the shape of a dock. I let the river shove me toward it, crashing against the wooden pilings. With the last strength in my arms, I clung and pulled myself up, coughing river water until my throat burned, collapsing on the planks, shivering so violently I thought my bones might crack. I pressed my cheek to the rough wood. The river had tried to claim me, but I was still here. And if I was still here, then I had choices to make. I don't remember how long I lay there on the dock before I heard footsteps. At first, I thought it was the echo of my own heartbeat, pounding so loudly it filled my ears. But then a lantern swung above me, and a man's voice broke the night. "Louise, hurry, someone's here." A pair of hands lifted me gently, and I blinked up into the lined face of a man with gray stubble and eyes sharp with concern. Behind him came a woman wrapped in a flannel robe, her hair pinned back hastily, carrying a blanket. They smelled faintly of wood smoke and soap. strangers. But their presence felt like rescue itself. They pulled me inside their cabin, a small place that smelled of cedar walls and brewed coffee. I sat wrapped in blankets near a fire that hissed and popped, trying to make my body stop shaking. My lips were blue, and when Louise pressed a mug of broth into my hands, I couldn't keep it steady. The hot liquid spilled, but she just smiled gently and held the cup for me. "Name's Hank," the man said. "This here's Louise. We'll get you warmed up." His voice was firm, the kind of tone that left no room for panic. I wanted to tell them everything, that my daughter had shoved me into the river, that I had spent hours clawing against death, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I murmured, "They left me. My own family left me." Louise's hand stilled on my shoulder. She didn't ask questions, just tucked the blanket tighter around me. But in her silence, I felt something heavy. She believed me. The hours that followed were blurred by fatigue. Hank insisted I rest, promising he'd call a doctor in the morning. I drifted between sleep and waking, haunted by fragments, the look in Melissa's eyes, the roar of the water, the taste of betrayal that clung sharper than river mud. By dawn, my body still ached, but my mind had settled into a clarity as crisp as the mountain air outside their cabin. I had been spared for a reason. If Melissa and Gregory thought the river had erased me, then perhaps I had an advantage. Hank poured me coffee, strong and bitter, and asked, "What will you do now?" I stared into the dark liquid, my reflection trembling on the surface. For the first time in hours, I felt a spark of control. "I'll make sure they never get what they wanted," I said softly, my voice steady. When the sun rose over the Redstone Valley, the world outside Hank and Louise's cabin looked untouched, as though the river hadn't tried to kill me only hours before. The pine trees glistened with frost, and the river moved on with its endless indifference. I wrapped the borrowed blanket tighter around me and thought of Melissa. My daughter had once been the kind of child who ran to me after every scraped knee, who begged for bedtime stories, who cried the day I first let her paddle in shallow water. Where had that little girl gone? The answer was Gregory. From the moment he entered her life, something changed. Gregory was polished in that way. Small-town men sometimes try to be, always in pressed shirts, speaking as though the world owed him more than it had given. He talked about investments and property values at the dinner table, subjects that glazed Melissa's eyes but made her nod along. After she married him, the warmth between us cooled, replaced by conversations that circled around money and the riverfront land my husband and I had built our cabin on. It was no secret the Redstone property had appreciated. Developers had sniffed around for years, eager to turn the quiet banks into resorts. I always said no. That cabin wasn't just wood and nails, it was memory. Sweat. The place where my husband and I had watched the northern lights together, where Melissa had taken her first steps. Selling it felt like selling pieces of our lives. Gregory never hid his resentment. He'd make offhand comments about how old folks sometimes don't know how to maximize what they've got. And Melissa, once my fiercest ally, began echoing his tone. The last time we argued, she told me I was clinging to the past, that the land could set her and Gregory up for life. Her words cut deeper than she knew. Lying in that borrowed bed, I finally understood the look in her eyes last night, the hesitation, the tremor in her hand. She had chosen him over me, chosen greed over blood. A part of me wanted to run to the sheriff, to lay out the truth, but another part whispered caution. If I rushed, if I acted without thought, I might lose more than I already had. I needed to be deliberate, to make sure that if they wanted my legacy, they'd inherit nothing but regret. 2 days after the river tried to claim me, I stood in my own kitchen again, the kettle hissing on the stove like nothing had happened. My clothes had been washed, my bruises hidden under long sleeves. But inside me, something had shifted. I was not the same woman who had raised a glass of wine on a birthday boat. That woman had been naive, still clinging to the idea that family could be trusted simply because of blood. Now I knew better. I called Mr. Clayton, my lawyer of 30 years, and asked him to meet me at his office. He was a careful man, slow to speak, deliberate with every word, which was exactly what I needed. When I told him what had happened, I expected disbelief. Instead, he simply leaned back, folded his hands, and said, "Eleanor, if you survived that, then you have the upper hand. Let's make sure it counts." We drew up new papers that afternoon. My cabin, my land, every piece of inheritance I had once imagined Melissa would carry into her future. It was all reassigned. The Redstone property would go to the River Guardians Association, an old nonprofit I'd volunteered with years ago, dedicated to protecting waterways and teaching young people survival skills. A portion would seat a scholarship for children from working families to learn swimming and river safety. If Melissa and Gregory wanted wealth, they would find none of it here. Signing those documents was harder than I expected. My hand shook, not from doubt, but from grief. I thought of the nights I'd rocked Melissa to sleep, the lunches I'd packed, the promises I'd made to always be her safe place. With a stroke of ink, I severed a future I once believed in. Mr. Clayton caught my hesitation. "You're not punishing her, Eleanor," he said quietly. "You're protecting what matters." That night, I sat by the fire at my cabin and listened to the river rush by. Its sound was different now, less like a lullaby, more like a warning. I realized Melissa and Gregory would not stop at failure. They would come for answers, for documents, maybe even for me. But this time, I would be ready. It didn't take long. Barely a week after I signed the new will, I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel road that wound down to my cabin. The sound made my stomach tighten, though I had been expecting it. When the knock came, sharp and impatient, I already knew who stood on the other side. Melissa's face was pale when I opened the door, but she forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Gregory loomed behind her, his jaw tight, his gaze sweeping over the cabin like a man already taking inventory. "Mother," Melissa began, her voice sugary sweet, "we've been so worried since that night. We wanted to check on you." I stepped aside just enough for them to enter, though the air inside grew colder with their presence. Gregory didn't bother with niceties. His eyes darted to the shelves, the drawers, the desk where my papers used to be. "You know," he said finally, "it's not safe for you out here alone. Accidents happen. The river is unpredictable." The implication hung heavy. I met his stare and felt a strange calm settle over me. They thought they could intimidate me, that I was still the woman gasping for breath in the water. They were wrong. "I've already spoken to my lawyer," I said evenly. "Everything concerning this cabin and the land is no longer in your hands. The papers are ironclad, backed up, and filed. If anything happens to me, the sheriff will know exactly who to look at." Melissa's mask cracked, her lips parting as though she might protest. Gregory's nostrils flared, but for once he had no clever retort. "You wouldn't do that," Melissa whispered. "You wouldn't cut me out." I felt the ache of her words, but I did not waver. I did what I had to. Blood means nothing when it tries to drown you. The silence stretched until Gregory tugged at Melissa's arm. "Come on," he muttered. They left without another word, the slam of the door echoing like a gunshot. I stood alone in the cabin, trembling not from fear but from release. The battle lines had been drawn, and I had finally spoken them aloud. From that moment, there would be no going back. After the confrontation, the cabin felt emptier than ever, but not broken. For days I moved through its rooms with new eyes, seeing not just the place where Melissa grew up, but the place where I could plant something lasting. The papers were signed, the inheritance was secured for the River Guardians Association. But I wanted more than paperwork. I wanted to breathe life back into this land, to prove that legacy wasn't about who claimed the deed, but about what the place gave to others. That spring, I reached out to an old colleague from my rafting days, a woman named Karen who now ran safety courses for park rangers. Together, we drafted a plan, free summer lessons for children from working families, teaching them how to swim, read currents, and respect the river. We called it River Kids. The first Saturday, only 6 children showed up, shuffling nervously at the edge of the dock while their parents watched from lawn chairs. My bones ached as I eased into the water, but once I started demonstrating, muscle memory returned. I showed them how to float, how to kick without fighting the current, how to breathe when fear clawed at their throats. Their laughter rose above the water, sharp and pure, washing away the last echo of that night on the boat. Word spread quickly. By midsummer, we had dozens of children splashing in the Redstone, parents bringing potluck lunches, volunteers offering to teach. The cabin that Gregory had once eyed like a real estate prize became a place of noise and life, its porch sagging under the weight of wet towels and lemonade pitchers. One afternoon, a boy with freckles tugged on my hand. "Miss Eleanor," he said, "are you the River Grandma?" The nickname stuck. Soon everyone in town was calling me that, and instead of stinging, it filled me with a pride I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was building something. At night, when the children had gone home and the river settled into its slow murmur, I sat on the porch and watched the water gleam silver under the moon. The same river that had nearly ended me was now carrying a new generation forward. For the first time since Melissa's betrayal, I felt whole. It was nearly 4 years later when the first letter arrived. I found it tucked between the bills and seed catalogs in my mailbox, the handwriting unfamiliar at first glance, but trembling with a memory I could never forget. "Melissa." I carried it inside, sat at the kitchen table where the wood bore grooves from decades of family meals, and stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. The words inside were clumsy, smudged with tears. She wrote that Gregory had left her, that his promises had turned to debts, that she had followed him into shadows she could no longer bear. She wrote of regret, of shame, of nights where she woke hearing the river in her dreams, and she asked, simply, if there was still a place for her in my life. Reading it, my chest tightened with the old ache of love and anger tangled together. This was my daughter, the baby I had rocked to sleep, the girl who once called me her hero. But she was also the woman who had stood by while I nearly drowned. Forgiveness was no longer a single word I could offer. It was a boundary I had to guard. Weeks passed before I answered. I didn't invite her back into my home. Not yet. Instead, I wrote that she could visit the cabin on Saturdays when the River Kids program was running, that she could sit among the families and see what her choices had created in me. I told her forgiveness was not a door thrown open, but a window cracked, and she would need to prove she could breathe that air without poisoning it again. The first time she came, she stood apart, hands clasped, watching children leap into the water. Her eyes filled when one of the boys called me Grandma Ellie and threw his arms around my waist. She didn't speak much, only whispered a soft hello before leaving, but she returned the next week and the week after. I could not erase what she had done. The scar of betrayal ran too deep, but I could allow her the chance to face it, to stand in the presence of the life she had almost destroyed. That, I realized, was its own kind of justice. I turned 83 this past spring. My hands are slower now. My knees complain on cold mornings. But every Saturday, I still walk down to the river. The children change from year to year, some growing tall enough to wave at me from kayaks, others just learning how to float without fear. The program has outgrown the cabin. Funded now by local grants and supported by volunteers, I once would have called strangers. Yet when they greet me as Grandma Ellie, I feel the same warmth that saved me in my darkest hour. The river itself hasn't changed. It still runs fierce in spring, gentle in late summer, and merciless when the storms roll through. I used to fear its voice after that night, hearing only the roar that pulled me under. Now I hear something steadier, an endless reminder that survival is not enough. You must live with purpose, or else the current will carry you away. Melissa comes sometimes, sitting quietly among the parents. We exchange small words, cautious but genuine. I don't know if we will ever reclaim what was lost, and maybe that's not the point. The point is that she is alive, that I am alive, and that we both have to face what we chose. Forgiveness, I've learned, isn't about erasing the past. It's about deciding not to drown in it. On evenings when the sun lays gold across the redstone, I sit on the porch and let memory wash over me. My husband's laughter, my father's lessons, the moment my daughter betrayed me. All of it flows together in the current. The river nearly took me once, but it also returned me to myself. And in that balance, I found a legacy worth leaving behind. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy these family drama and revenge stories, please subscribe and join me for more every day.